On a quiet Sunday afternoon, the sun hung low in the sky, casting golden rays over the small suburban park. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and freshly cut grass. Birds chirped lazily from nearby trees, and children laughed as they chased each other around the playground. It was one of those perfect autumn days when everything seemed peaceful, until it wasn't. Retired Army General Marcus Thompson strolled along the winding path that cut through the heart of the park. At 62 years old, he carried himself with an unmistakable air of authority, his posture straight and his steps deliberate. Even though he wore casual clothes, a simple sweater, jeans, and sturdy walking shoes, there was something about him that commanded respect. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, and his sharp eyes scanned the surroundings with the same alertness he'd honed during decades of military service. Marcus loved these walks. They gave him time to think, to reflect on life after his long career in the armed forces. After serving his country for over 30 years, rising to the rank of general, and earning countless medals for bravery and leadership, Marcus had earned the right to enjoy his retirement. But even now, he couldn't completely let go of the habits drilled into him by years of discipline. Every movement, every glance, every decision was calculated, even if no one else noticed. As he walked, Marcus thought about how different this park felt compared to the war zones he'd once navigated. Here there were no bombs exploding in the distance, no soldiers anxiously scanning rooftops for snipers. Instead, families picnicked under shady trees, couples held hands on benches, and joggers weaved past with earbuds firmly planted. It was a world away from the chaos he'd left behind, and yet Marcus knew better than most that danger could lurk anywhere, even in places that seemed safe. Unbeknownst to Marcus, someone was watching him. Officer Brian Calloway sat in his patrol car at the edge of the park, sipping coffee from a paper cup. He was nearing the end of his shift, but instead of heading back to the station, he decided to take one last loop through the area. The park was usually quiet, filled with familiar faces who minded their own business. But today, something caught his eye, a tall black man walking alone down the path. Brian squinted through the windshield, studying the figure. The man looked confident, almost too confident, striding purposefully like he owned the place. To Brian, there was something off-putting about the way the stranger carried himself. Maybe it was the way his shoulders didn't slump like most people's did after hours of walking. Or maybe it was the fact that he wasn't looking at his phone or stopping to admire the scenery like everyone else. Whatever it was, Brian felt uneasy. His mind began to race. "What's he doing here?" Brian muttered, to himself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. He rolled down the window slightly, letting the cool breeze filter into the car. For some reason, he couldn't shake the feeling that this man didn't belong. And then, almost instinctively, Brian started making assumptions. He's probably up to no good, Brian thought, his jaw tightening. Maybe he's casing the place. Or maybe he's waiting for someone to rob. These thoughts weren't based on anything concrete, just gut feelings fueled by stereotypes and biases he'd never bothered to question. Without giving it much thought, Brian grabbed his radio and called dispatch. "I'm going to check out a suspicious individual in the park," he said curtly before stepping out of the car. As Brian approached Marcus, his boots crunching against the gravel path, he tried to appear calm and professional. But inside, his pulse quickened. He rested his hand on the holster of his gun, just in case. When he was close enough, he cleared his throat loudly to get the man's attention. "Excuse me, sir," Brian barked, his voice cutting through the peaceful hum of the park. Startled, Marcus turned around, his brow furrowing slightly. He hadn't been expecting anyone to address him, especially not in such a confrontational tone. "Yes?" Marcus replied evenly, meeting the officer's gaze without flinching. His voice was steady, betraying none of the surprise or confusion he might have felt. To anyone else, he probably looked unfazed. But to Brian, his calm demeanor only added fuel to the fire. "I need to see some ID," Brian demanded, taking another step closer. His tone was sharp, accusatory, leaving little room for negotiation. "What are you doing here?" Marcus blinked, momentarily taken aback by the request. "I'm just taking a walk," he said simply, gesturing toward the trail behind him. "Is there a problem?" But Brian wasn't satisfied with the answer. To him, Marcus's calm response came across as defiance. Why wasn't this guy nervous? Most people would be apologetic, eager to explain themselves. But not this man. No, he stood there like he had nothing to hide, or worse, like he didn't care what a police officer thought. "You can't just take a walk here," Brian snapped, his face reddening. "This is private property." Marcus frowned, genuinely confused. "Private property? I've walked through this park dozens of times. It's public land." Now it was Brian's turn to bristle. How dare this guy argue with him? Didn't he know who he was talking to? Brian's temper flared, and he took another aggressive step forward. "Don't tell me my job," he growled, his hand still hovering dangerously close to his weapon. "Show me your ID or I'll arrest you for trespassing." The tension between them was palpable, thick enough to slice with a knife. Passers-by began to slow down, glancing curiously at the scene unfolding before them. Some exchanged worried looks. Others pulled out their phones, sensing that this wasn't going to end well. Meanwhile, Marcus remained composed, refusing to let the officer's hostility rattle him. Deep down, however, he couldn't help but feel a sinking sense of dread. Something told him this encounter was far from over, and it wouldn't end peacefully unless he handled it carefully. Little did either man know, this confrontation would ripple far beyond the confines of the park, setting off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. As the tension between Marcus and Officer Brian Calloway escalated, the atmosphere in the park shifted dramatically. What had started as a peaceful Sunday afternoon was quickly turning into a spectacle that drew unwanted attention. The once relaxed ambiance was now charged with unease, and the curious glances of onlookers only added to the pressure mounting between the two men. Marcus stood his ground, refusing to let the officer's aggressive demeanor intimidate him. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, and he wasn't about to back down simply because someone in uniform demanded it. "I don't need to show you my ID," Marcus said firmly, his voice calm but resolute. "I'm not breaking any laws. This is a public park, and I have every right to be here." But Officer Calloway wasn't interested in logic or reason. His frustration boiled over, fueled by assumptions and biases he couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. To him, Marcus's refusal to comply felt like an act of defiance, a challenge to his authority. And challenges were something Brian Calloway didn't take lightly. "You think you're special, don't you?" Brian sneered, taking another menacing step closer. His tone dripped with condescension, and his words carried an unmistakable edge of hostility. "Walking around like you own the place, acting all high and mighty." Marcus blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the venom in the officer's voice. But he quickly recovered, maintaining his composure. "I'm not acting high and mighty," he replied evenly. "I'm just standing up for my rights. If you have a legitimate reason to ask for my identification, fine. But if this is just harassment, then no, I won't cooperate." The word harassment struck a nerve with Brian. His face flushed red and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. How dare this man accuse him of wrongdoing? In Brian's mind, he was the one enforcing the law, protecting the community from potential threats. And yet, here was this stranger, this tall, imposing black man, questioning his motives and undermining his authority in front of witnesses. "You want to talk about harassment?" Brian shot back, his voice rising. "How about disrespecting an officer of the law? That's what you're doing right now. You're lucky I don't arrest you for that alone." Marcus sighed inwardly, recognizing the futility of arguing further. This wasn't about facts or fairness. It was about control. Still, he refused to give in to the officer's intimidation tactics. "Look," he said, softening his tone slightly in an effort to de-escalate the situation. "I'm not trying to disrespect anyone. I'm just asking for some common sense here. Why are you targeting me? What exactly am I supposed to have done?" But Brian wasn't listening. His anger had taken hold, clouding his judgment and amplifying his prejudices. Without warning, he reached for his holster and pulled out his gun, pointing it directly at Marcus. Time seemed to freeze as the barrel of the weapon locked onto its target. Gasps erupted from nearby onlookers, who until now had been mere spectators. Some instinctively stepped backward, while others froze in shock, unsure of what to do next. "Don't move," Brian barked, his voice loud enough to echo through the park. "Keep your hands where I can see them." For a brief moment, Marcus felt a surge of fear, not for himself, but for the people around him. A single misstep, a twitch of the finger, could turn this volatile situation deadly. He raised his hands slowly, palms open, to show he posed no threat. "There's no need for that," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I'm not armed. I haven't done anything wrong." But Brian wasn't hearing any of it. His mind was racing, feeding off his own irrational fears and insecurities. To him, Marcus represented everything he disliked. Confident black man, unafraid to stand up to authority. It didn't matter that Marcus was unarmed, elderly, and clearly harmless. All Brian saw was a perceived challenge to his power, and he reacted accordingly. "You think you're better than me, huh?" Brian spat, his grip tightening on the gun. "You think your fancy walk in the park makes you untouchable? Well, guess what? I run this neighborhood, not you." The insult stung, though Marcus didn't let it show. Instead, he focused on staying calm, knowing that losing his temper would only make things worse. "I don't want any trouble," he said, his tone measured. "If you have a problem with me, we can resolve it peacefully. There's no reason for this to get ugly." But Brian wasn't interested in resolving anything. His ego had been bruised, and he needed to assert dominance. "Shut up," he shouted, jabbing the gun forward for emphasis. "You don't get to tell me what to do. You're nothing but a—" He stopped mid-sentence, cutting himself off before the slur slipped out. For a split second, he hesitated, aware that his words were being recorded by several phones pointed in his direction, but the damage was already done. The implication hung heavy in the air, leaving no doubt about the underlying racism driving his actions. By now, a small crowd had gathered, their horrified expressions reflecting the gravity of the situation. Some whispered nervously among themselves, while others frantically dialed 911, hoping backup would arrive soon. Among the onlookers was Sarah Klein, a local journalist who happened to be walking her dog in the park. Recognizing Marcus from previous news coverage of his military career, she stepped forward cautiously, her phone held aloft to capture the unfolding drama. "Officer," Sarah called out, her voice trembling but determined. "What's going on here? Why do you have your weapon drawn?" Brian whipped his head around, glaring at her with barely concealed rage. "This doesn't concern you, lady," he snapped. "Stay out of it unless you want to get hurt." Sarah flinched but didn't. "Back down." She had seen too many stories like this end tragically, and she wasn't about to let it happen again, not on her watch. "Actually, it does concern me," she replied, her voice firmer now. "This is a public space, and I have a right to know why you're threatening an unarmed citizen." Her intervention only enraged Brian further. "You reporters always sticking your noses where they don't belong," he growled, shifting his weight uncomfortably. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. He glanced around at the growing crowd, realizing he might have overplayed his hand. But instead of backing down, he doubled down, desperate to regain control. "This man is resisting arrest," Brian declared loudly, as if trying to justify his actions to both himself and the audience. "He's obstructing justice, and I'm within my rights to detain him." Marcus remained silent, his expression unreadable. Inside, however, his mind raced. He knew the stakes were high. If he pushed back too hard, the situation could spiral out of control. But if he gave in completely, he risked validating the officer's abuse of power. It was a delicate balance, one that required patience and restraint. As the standoff continued, the tension grew unbearable. Parents ushered their children away from the scene, shielding them from the sight of a gun pointed at an innocent man. Others filmed silently, their phones capturing every word and movement. The videos would later serve as evidence, but for now, they were a lifeline, a way to hold Brian accountable for his actions. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the confrontation reached a tipping point. Backup officers arrived, their sirens wailing in the distance. As they approached, confusion rippled through their ranks. One of the responding officers, a younger man named Derek, recognized Marcus immediately. "Wait a minute," Derek said, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Isn't that General Thompson?" The name sent shockwaves through the group. Even Brian, for all his bravado, faltered slightly. The realization that he had targeted a decorated war hero, a man who had served his country with honor and distinction, was beginning to sink in. But the damage had already been done, and there was no undoing it. For Marcus, the arrival of additional officers offered little comfort. While the immediate threat may have lessened, the ordeal had left its mark. He had faced danger countless times during his military career, but never had he expected to encounter such hostility in his own community. As he stood there, surrounded by flashing lights and murmuring voices, he couldn't help but wonder, would this ever truly end? Or was this just another chapter in a story far bigger than himself? The answer, he realized, lay not in the outcome of this single incident, but in the broader fight for justice and equality that stretched far beyond the confines of the park. The arrival of backup officers brought a new layer of chaos to the already tense scene. Sirens blared, and flashing red and blue lights bathed the park in an eerie glow. Parents quickly ushered their children away from the commotion, while other onlookers scrambled to find safe vantage points. Some hid behind trees or benches, peeking out cautiously, while others stood frozen, unsure whether to stay or flee. The peaceful Sunday afternoon had transformed into something out of a movie, a surreal spectacle that no one could have anticipated. As the responding officers stepped out of their vehicles, confusion rippled through their ranks. One of them, Officer Derek Hayes, immediately recognized Marcus. Derek was younger than most of his colleagues, with a reputation for being level-headed and empathetic. He had grown up hearing stories about General Marcus Thompson's heroism during wartime, how he had led troops under unimaginable conditions, earning medals for bravery and inspiring countless soldiers along the way. Seeing the legendary figure now standing calmly despite having a gun pointed at him left Derek stunned. "Wait a second," Derek said aloud, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Is that General Thompson?" His words caught the attention of the other officers, who exchanged uneasy glances. Even Brian Calloway, still gripping his weapon tightly, seemed to falter slightly. For a moment, the tension in the air shifted. The name carried weight, not just because of Marcus's military accolades, but because it represented everything honorable and respected in their society. Here was a man who had risked his life for his country, only to be treated like a criminal in broad daylight. Derek approached cautiously, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. "Sir," he said, addressing Marcus directly. "Are you okay? What's going on here?" Marcus nodded slowly, his expression remaining calm despite the whirlwind around him. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice steady. "But this officer has been harassing me without cause. He drew his weapon on me and made inappropriate remarks." The word inappropriate hung in the air, heavy with implication. Derek turned to Brian, his brow furrowing as he tried to piece together what had happened. "Brian, stand down," Derek ordered, his tone firm but controlled. "Put your weapon away now." For a split second, Brian hesitated. Lowering his gun felt like admitting defeat, like surrendering the authority he had fought so hard to assert. But with multiple witnesses, including fellow officers, he had little choice. Reluctantly, he holstered his weapon, though his scowl deepened. His eyes darted between Marcus and Derek, searching for some way to justify his actions. "This guy was being uncooperative," Brian muttered defensively, his voice laced with frustration. "He wouldn't show me his ID, and he kept arguing. With me, I was just doing my job." Derek sighed, shaking his head slightly. "Arguing doesn't give you the right to pull your weapon," he replied evenly. "And walking in a public park isn't a crime, you know that." Brian didn't respond, but the flush creeping up his neck betrayed his discomfort. Meanwhile, Sarah Klein, the journalist who had earlier intervened, stepped forward again. Her phone was still recording, capturing every detail of the unfolding drama. She addressed Derek directly, her voice clear and composed. "Officer, I witnessed the entire interaction, she said. This man, she gestured toward Marcus, was simply taking a walk when Officer Calloway confronted him aggressively. There was no provocation, no reason for this escalation. It's all on video. Her statement drew murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Several people held up their phones, showing footage they had captured. Others recounted what they had seen, their voices overlapping in a chorus of outrage. Words like unnecessary, excessive, and unjustified echoed through the park, painting a damning picture of Brian's conduct. One woman, clutching her young daughter's hand, spoke up tearfully. "My little girl saw that man point a gun at him," she said, pointing at Brian. "She asked me why the police were scaring someone who hadn't done anything wrong. How am I supposed to explain that to her?" Another bystander, an older man leaning heavily on a cane, chimed in. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Never once have I seen something like this. That poor man didn't deserve to be treated that way." The weight of these testimonies began to press down on everyone present. Even some of Brian's fellow officers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. They knew how bad this looked, not just for Brian, but for the department as a whole. Public trust was fragile, and moments like this could shatter it completely. Amidst the growing clamor, Derek focused on de-escalating the situation. He motioned for another officer to take Brian aside, separating him from Marcus and the crowd. Then, turning back to Marcus, he offered a sincere apology. "General Thompson," Derek said, his tone respectful, "I'm sorry this happened to you. We'll make sure it's handled properly." Marcus nodded, appreciating the sentiment but knowing full well that apologies weren't enough. "Thank you, officer," he replied. "But this isn't just about me. This kind of behavior affects everyone. If we don't address it, it will keep happening." His words resonated deeply with those around him. People nodded in agreement, whispering among themselves. Some expressed admiration for Marcus's composure under such intense pressure, while others voiced their anger at the systemic issues highlighted by the incident. A few even suggested organizing protests or contacting local media outlets to ensure the story received widespread attention. Sarah, sensing the gravity of the moment, seized the opportunity to amplify the message. "General Thompson," she said, stepping closer, "would you be willing to share your side of the story? This is bigger than just one encounter. It's about accountability and justice. People need to hear your voice." Marcus hesitated briefly, considering the implications. He hadn't sought out this confrontation, nor did he relish the idea of becoming the center of a media storm, but he also understood the importance of speaking out. If his experience could shine a light on broader issues, then perhaps it would serve a greater purpose. "I'll do it," he said finally, his resolve strengthening. "But not for me, for everyone who's ever faced injustice and felt powerless to fight back." With that, the group began dispersing slowly, though the energy in the park remained charged. Officers worked to secure the area, collecting statements from witnesses and confiscating videos as evidence. Brian, now isolated and visibly agitated, paced back and forth near his patrol car, muttering under his breath. His colleagues avoided engaging with him, unsure of what to say. Meanwhile, Sarah stayed close to Marcus, jotting down notes and asking thoughtful questions. She promised to write a detailed article that would capture the truth of what had transpired, ensuring that no detail was overlooked. As she spoke, Marcus noticed the determination in her eyes, a reflection of his own quiet strength. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, the immediate crisis had subsided, but the ripple effects of the day's events were only beginning to unfold. News of the altercation spread rapidly, fueled by social media posts and eyewitness accounts. Hashtags like "Justice for General Thompson" and "The Accountability" now began trending online, drawing national attention to the case. For Marcus, the ordeal marked the start of a new chapter, one he hadn't chosen but was prepared to embrace. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Challenging entrenched systems of power rarely was. But as he walked away from the park, surrounded by supporters and allies, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, his experience could spark meaningful change, not just for himself but for countless others who deserved to live free from fear and discrimination. And so, as the night settled over the city, the echoes of that fateful Sunday afternoon lingered in the air, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, courage and resilience could pave the way for progress. The days following the incident in the park were a whirlwind of activity, both for General Marcus Thompson and the community at large. What had started as a quiet Sunday afternoon walk had spiraled into a national conversation about accountability, systemic bias, and the treatment of individuals by those sworn to protect them. For Marcus, life became a blur of interviews, meetings, and public appearances, each one pulling him further into a spotlight he hadn't sought but couldn't ignore. As news of the confrontation spread, outrage rippled across social media platforms. Videos captured by witnesses went viral within hours, amassing millions of views and sparking heated debates. People from all walks of life weighed in, sharing their thoughts, fears, and frustrations. Some praised Marcus's composure under pressure, calling him a symbol of dignity and resilience. Others condemned Officer Brian Calloway's actions, labeling them as yet another example of unchecked prejudice within law enforcement. Hashtags like Justice for General Thompson and End Police Bias dominated Twitter trends, while petitions demanding accountability garnered hundreds of thousands of signatures. Local and national news outlets scrambled to cover the story, sending reporters to interview eyewitnesses, experts, and community leaders. Journalists flocked to Marcus's modest home, hoping to speak with the man at the center of the controversy. At first, Marcus was hesitant to engage with the media. He valued his privacy and didn't want to become a public figure. But after much thought and encouragement from Sarah Klein, the journalist who had been present during the incident, he decided to use his platform to advocate for change. "I didn't ask for this," Marcus said during his first televised interview, sitting in his living room with photos of his family displayed on the walls behind him. "But if my experience can shine a light on the injustices so many people face every day, then I feel it's my duty to speak up." His words resonated deeply with viewers. Here was a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country, only to be treated as a threat in his own community. His calm demeanor and unwavering commitment to justice inspired countless others to join the cause. Veterans organizations rallied behind him, praising his courage and calling for reforms within police departments nationwide. Civil rights groups organized marches and rallies, using Marcus's story as a rallying cry for broader societal change. Meanwhile, the fallout from the incident continued to reverberate through the police department. Internal Affairs launched an investigation into Officer Calloway's conduct, examining not only the events in the park, but also his history of complaints and disciplinary actions. It quickly became apparent that this wasn't an isolated case. Multiple allegations of racial profiling and excessive force had been filed against Calloway over the years, many of which had been dismissed or swept under the rug. Anonymous testimonies from fellow officers revealed troubling patterns: derogatory comments made during briefings, dismissive attitudes toward minority communities, and a general lack of accountability within the department. Despite mounting evidence, resistance to change remained strong within certain circles. Some of Calloway's colleagues defended his actions, arguing that he was simply doing his job and responding to perceived threats. Others claimed the entire situation had been blown out of proportion, dismissing calls for reform as politically motivated attacks on law enforcement. These voices fueled division, pitting supporters of police reform against those who believed officers were being unfairly targeted. But the tide was turning. Public pressure forced officials to take action. Within days, Calloway was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. His badge and gun were confiscated, and he was ordered to stay away from the park where the incident occurred. While some saw these measures as insufficient, others viewed them as a step in the right direction, a sign that even those in positions of power could be held accountable. For Marcus, the breaking point came when he received a letter from a young boy named Jamal, who lived in the same neighborhood as the park. The handwritten note was simple but heartfelt. "Dear General Thompson, thank you for standing up for us. My mom says you're a hero because you didn't let anyone scare you. I want to be brave like you when I grow up." Holding the letter, In his hands, Marcus felt a surge of emotion. He realized that his actions, or rather his refusal to back down, had touched lives far beyond his own. Children like Jamal were watching, learning what it meant to stand firm in the face of adversity. That realization strengthened his resolve to push for meaningful change, no matter how daunting the task might seem. In the weeks that followed, Marcus partnered with grassroots organizations to launch a series of initiatives aimed at addressing systemic issues within law enforcement. He worked closely with advocacy groups to develop training programs focused on de-escalation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and implicit bias awareness. These programs were designed not to vilify officers, but to equip them with the tools they needed to serve their communities more effectively. Marcus also traveled across the country, speaking at conferences, town halls, and schools about the importance of accountability and mutual respect. His speeches often began with a personal anecdote, the story of that fateful Sunday afternoon, but always ended with a call to action. "We can't change the past," he would say, his voice steady and commanding, "but we can shape the future. Together, we have the power to create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and fairness. Not because of who they are, but because it's the right thing to do." His efforts inspired others to get involved. Community members organized neighborhood watch programs, emphasizing collaboration between residents and police officers. Schools incorporated lessons on civil rights and social justice into their curricula, ensuring that younger generations understood the importance of equality and empathy. Even some police departments began implementing reforms voluntarily, recognizing that rebuilding trust required more than lip service. It demanded tangible action. Through it all, Marcus remained grounded, drawing strength from his faith, family, and military background. He knew the fight wouldn't end overnight. Systemic change rarely did. But he also knew that progress was possible. One step, one conversation, one policy at a time. As the investigation into Officer Calloway's conduct progressed, details emerged that painted an increasingly damning picture. Former colleagues described him as someone who thrived on intimidation, often targeting minorities and low-income individuals. Records showed that several complaints against him had been ignored or mishandled, allowing his behavior to continue unchecked. When confronted with this evidence, even some of his staunchest defenders began to waver, acknowledging that something had gone terribly wrong. By the time the Internal Affairs report was finalized, public opinion had shifted decisively. Calls for accountability grew louder, echoing not just in the park where the incident occurred but in cities and towns across the nation. Protesters marched peacefully, holding signs that read, "No justice, no peace, and accountability starts now." Politicians, eager to align themselves with the growing movement, introduced legislation aimed at increasing transparency and oversight within law enforcement agencies. For Marcus, the culmination of these efforts came when he stood alongside activists, lawmakers, and community leaders at a press conference announcing sweeping reforms. The package included measures such as mandatory body cameras for all officers, independent review boards to investigate misconduct, and stricter penalties for violations of civil rights. It wasn't perfect, no solution ever was, but it represented a significant step forward. As Marcus addressed the crowd gathered outside City Hall, his voice carried a mix of gratitude and determination. "This isn't the end of the journey," he said, looking out at the sea of faces before him. "It's just the beginning. Real change takes time, effort, and unity. But if we keep pushing, keep fighting, I believe we can build a better future for ourselves, for our children, and for generations to come." The applause that followed was thunderous, a testament to the impact of one man's courage and conviction. And though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, Marcus walked away from the podium with renewed hope. The road to justice might be long and winding, but with persistence and solidarity, he knew it was a road worth traveling. The investigation into Officer Brian Calloway's conduct became a focal point for the entire city, and eventually, the nation. What had started as a routine inquiry quickly escalated into a high-profile case that drew scrutiny from every corner of society. The pressure mounted on law enforcement officials, government leaders, and even ordinary citizens to ensure that justice was served. For Marcus Thompson, this phase of the ordeal was both exhausting and enlightening, as he witnessed firsthand the complexities of holding powerful institutions accountable. Internal affairs investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the events leading up to the confrontation in the park. They reviewed hours of video footage captured by witnesses, listened to audio recordings of emergency calls made during the incident, and interviewed everyone involved, from Marcus himself to the bystanders who had spoken out against Officer Calloway's behavior. Each new piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of what had transpired, but it also raised troubling questions about how such an egregious misuse of authority could have occurred in the first place. One of the most damning revelations came from past records. As investigators dug deeper into Brian Calloway's professional history, they uncovered a pattern of misconduct that stretched back years. Complaints filed by members of the community described similar incidents: aggressive stops based on racial profiling, unnecessary use of force, and derogatory language directed at minorities. In one instance, a young black teenager alleged that Calloway had pulled him over without cause, searched his car, and then mocked him for driving while black. Another complaint came from a Latina woman who said Calloway had accused her of being undocumented during a routine traffic stop, despite providing valid identification. What struck investigators most was how many of these complaints had been dismissed or downplayed. Some were marked as unfounded, due to lack of evidence, while others were simply ignored altogether. Internal memos revealed that supervisors often sided with Calloway, brushing off concerns as misunderstandings or exaggerations. Even when disciplinary action was recommended, it was typically minimal, a slap on the wrist rather than meaningful consequences. This systemic failure to address problematic behavior infuriated advocacy groups, who argued that it created an environment where officers like Calloway felt emboldened to act with impunity. "It's not just one bad apple," said Rachel Morales, a spokesperson for a local civil rights organization. "It's the barrel itself that's rotten. When departments fail to hold their officers accountable, they're complicit in perpetuating harm." Public outrage reached new heights as these details emerged. Protesters took to the streets once again, demanding transparency and accountability. Signs bearing slogans like "No more excuses" and "Hold them all accountable" filled parks and plazas across the city. Social media campaigns amplified the message, calling attention to other cases of police misconduct and urging people to contact elected officials. The sheer volume of voices made it impossible for authorities to ignore the growing demand for reform. Faced with mounting pressure, city officials announced a series of measures aimed at addressing public concerns. These included the formation of an independent oversight board, tasked with reviewing allegations of misconduct, mandatory implicit bias training for all officers, and increased funding for community policing initiatives. While some praised these steps as long overdue, others criticized them as insufficient, arguing that true change required more radical action. Amidst the chaos, Marcus remained steadfast in his commitment to advocating for justice. He attended town hall meetings, met with lawmakers, and collaborated with activists to push for comprehensive reforms. His calm demeanor and unwavering focus earned him widespread admiration, but privately, he struggled with the emotional toll of reliving the incident over and over again. Every interview, every meeting, every conversation forced him to confront the reality of what had happened and the knowledge that it could happen again if nothing changed. One particularly poignant moment came when Marcus visited a community center in a predominantly black neighborhood. The room was packed with residents eager to hear him speak, but instead of delivering a prepared speech, Marcus opened the floor for discussion. People shared their own stories of encounters with law enforcement, some minor inconveniences, others harrowing experiences that left lasting scars. A grandmother recounted how her grandson had been stopped multiple times while walking home from school, always for no apparent reason. A young man described being handcuffed and detained during a traffic stop, only to be released hours later without explanation. Listening to these accounts, Marcus felt a deep sense of responsibility. He realized that his experience wasn't unique. It was part of a much larger narrative, one that needed to be acknowledged and addressed. "We can't let fear divide us," he told the crowd, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We have to stand together, support each other, and demand better, not just for ourselves but for our children and grandchildren." His words resonated deeply with those present, sparking a renewed sense of determination. Many pledged to get involved in advocacy efforts, whether by attending protests, contacting representatives, or volunteering with organizations working toward reform. Others committed to fostering dialogue between communities and police departments, believing that understanding and trust could be rebuilt through open communication. As the weeks turned into months, the legal proceedings against Brian Calloway moved forward. Charges were formally filed, including assault, unlawful detainment, and violation of civil rights. The decision to prosecute sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community, where criminal charges against officers were rare. Some viewed it as a turning point, a sign that the system was finally willing to hold itself accountable. Others saw it as an attack on policing itself, fueling debates about the balance between accountability and protecting those who serve. For Marcus, the trial loomed large on the horizon. It would be a grueling process, requiring him to recount the events of that day in excruciating detail. But he approached it with the same resolve that had guided him throughout his military career. "I didn't ask for this fight," he often said, "but I won't shy away from it either. If my story can help prevent others from going through the same thing, then it's worth every moment." In the lead-up to the trial, Marcus leaned heavily on his support network, family, friends, and fellow advocates who understood the weight of what he was carrying. His wife, Evelyn, stood by his side through every step of the journey, offering comfort and encouragement. "You've always been a fighter," she told him one evening as they sat together on their porch. "And now you're fighting for something bigger than yourself. I'm so proud of you." Her words reminded Marcus why he couldn't give up. Not yet. The road ahead would be challenging, but he knew he wasn't alone. Across the country, people were rallying behind him, using his story as a catalyst for change. From classrooms to boardrooms, conversations about justice and equality were taking place, planting seeds for a brighter future. And so, as the date of the trial approached, Marcus found solace in the knowledge that his experience had sparked something far greater than he could have imagined. It wasn't just about holding one officer accountable. It was about challenging a system that had allowed such injustices to persist for far too long. With each passing day, the movement grew, stronger, fueled by the collective hope that real change was possible, if only enough people refused to stay silent.